We left off on Tuesday talking a little bit about just this sense of, okay, so forest and outdoor recreation, separately from sports, separately from like urban recreation kinds of things where, you're playing basketball on a court, which is approximately the same dimensions, approximately within some basic variation, like maple strip basketball arena floor versus tar and chip asphalt outdoor basketball court. It's basically the same thing, right? The hoop is more or less the same height. The backboard is more or less the same total area and shape and so forth. It's all very homogeneous. You can play basketball basically the same way anywhere in the world because it's a constructed facility and is managed, and the sport has rules which kind of fence off how things go. And lots of variations, like playing horse or 21 versus a pickup half-court game versus like a college or professional game, but it's still basically all recognizable as basketball. And it doesn't matter if you're playing 5,000 feet in Denver or at several hundred feet in the Midwest or in Death Valley or something like that. Not a big deal. Now, forest and outdoor recreation, on the other hand, obviously is much more resource focused, much more resource specific, and therefore much more resource dependent. So our last example on Tuesday was with this big water kayaking set of clips with drone photography and stuff like that. You got to have a lot of things very specifically correct, meaning very specifically within tight tolerance ranges. How many cubic feet per second is enough to make that waterfall a fun drop in a little creek boat like that, versus how many CFS is so much that you're definitely killing people on the way down, okay? And there's just not a ton of places on the face of the earth at any given moment that are in that sort of Goldilocks range of enough but not too much. Make sense? Okay, so as a result, our job as foresters has a lot of consequence. We have a lot more variability in what to expect each day versus somebody, for example, running a rec center. In the student rec center on campus over here, the pool needs to be managed each day, but basically it's an indoor pool in the rec center. It's in a set temperature range, it's in a set pH range or alkalinity, a set disinfectant timing schedule and so forth. And with this stuff, after a rain in the Potomac Gorge, this is not the Potomac Gorge here, but the playboaters and stuff like that are hitting some big water hydraulics, some of which are large enough to swallow a house, and you don't see even the wreckage coming out downstream. It's just gone somewhere, down to Hades or whatever. Like, that's fun water to go boat on, but it's also, those flooding events are washing a whole bunch of poorly managed septic leaching from like the entire city of Washington, D.C. into the Potomac up watershed there, and you come up with all sorts of exotic infections and stuff like that. So as foresters, we gotta wrestle with, look, we're not the CDC. If somebody gets some exciting new infection they're gonna name after that person, from playboating in C&O Canal National Historic Park, which is on the Potomac River, while in the domain of the National Park Service, that's kind of not our responsibility, the infectious disease side of it, but we also know a thing or five about managing whitewater in Washington, D.C. on the Potomac. So we do have a role in that, like helping people understand, hey, this is really exciting at certain moments during high hydrograph, high flow rate times, but understand, but this is connected to all of the upper watershed. You're draining into this point everything that is uphill, and you can't see everything uphill, and the water looks and tastes about the same, whether or not it's got exciting microbes in it or not. So it's complex, it's interesting, it's dynamic, and of course with climate change, this stuff is always on the move. We're moving the goalposts quite a bit here with this. So it gets tricky, for sure. So another way, more conceptually, to zoom out from that particular example is to look at the Venn diagram of, we got the human dimensions, the goals, the desires, the budget, the opportunity, the management, all of the things that humans are contributing to this milieu. And then we've also got the interface against that of all of the natural resource dynamics, the ecosystems that we want to use for human things, like forest and outdoor recreation, or providing fiber, food, timber products, non-timber products, and stuff like that. Right? This is not a new concept for you, but here in forest rec management, the Venn diagram becomes much more important as the interaction versus just getting good as a forest ecologist, because no ecology happens these days absent of the context and the influence and the impacts, the changes that we bring as human beings to these places. Okay? So, one way to kind of organize our understanding of living and working in this overlap space is going to be looking at Clausen and Neck's 4 stages of recreation. So let's take a quick look at that. There's this sense of, it's easier for us to think about the rock climber out there or the guy or gal on the ATV throwing up big rooster tails of dirt, not soil, coming back through and tearing the street up as Ice Cube once rapped. There's all this other stuff that goes into it. There's the anticipation. Like, for those of you who enjoy rock climbing, or bouldering, or scrambling, or canyoneering, or project caving, any of these sort of related things where you might be on harness, using other kinds of pro or personal protective equipment, and so forth, there's a sense of, you might have this vague sense that other people out there somewhere do this stuff, and good for them. But for you to be doing it, at some point there was this discovery moment or discovery season in your life. And then out of that, some subset of the people who discover climbing or canyoneering or whatever fill in the blank activity, there's got to be some positive portrayal to it. Like, you get started in it because a friend of yours likes it and they're already into it and they sort of drag you along kicking and screaming, and then you go on your first rock face or pitch or whatever and think, oh, this isn't so bad. Like, it seems kind of expensive and some of these people are a little bit snobby and elitist and they use all these words that I don't recognize, or they seem to use words that I use normally, but they use them in a very special way, jargon. Maybe I could get into that. Or maybe there is an attractive certain somebody that is in this community, this tribe, this subculture, and I want to get to know them, so I'll see if I can get a little rock climbing in and see if I can impress them and stop my fall with my face, and maybe that person will drive me to the emergency room. So there's discovery. That's got to happen. And the reason that we bring this up, even though this idea first came out in the 1960s, is that with folks doing more living looking at a screen than doing things outside in a lot of cases, or growing up in big cities and not growing up with the sense of, oh, there's all this world to go explore, and instead doing city things. At the same time, things like bullet action cameras or GoPros, that sort of a thing, waterproof, small, high field of view, even 360 cameras these days, and then somebody discovering this activity on their feed, their endless scrolling, thumb arthritis inducing, dopamine seeking thing of looking at YouTube shorts or Instagram stories or whatever. You see influencers, in many cases paid by companies like Red Bull, to put this discovery idea in your head and using marketing techniques to create a sense of attraction instead of discovering that sense of attraction organically, because their brand is associated with that life way. And so if you go out rock climbing, you are ever so slightly more likely to buy cans of Red Bull and take them out to the site so that you can be fully focused and present and really coked up on B vitamins and taurine and ginseng and guarana and just criminal amounts of caffeine. Okay? So So these days, for the first time in human history, foresters are having to grapple with the sense of, now I'm not really competing with Red Bull, but I'm having to deal with millions of people, full stop. Millions of people coming into my forested natural area, my protected area, my park, my wildlife refuge, with an idea that was planted there by a company with an economic agenda. That's different than it has ever been in the history of humankind in the past couple of decades alone. That's weird. Within your lifetimes, this stuff has really blown up. So, the idea of discovery and then attraction being the thing, like, there's got to be this sense of organic discovery and a sense of it being a positive thing. And from the marketing side of things, a created or incepted sense of need for this. Marketing is designed to create an awareness of an emotional hole that you don't have filled yet, and then to suggest an answer to that, which happens to be their product or service. Okay? So, again, this is new in the last couple of decades, which makes it weird and interesting to be a park ranger right now. So that's cool. Second stage out of 4 for the stages of recreation is the planning phase. This is where you get to nerd out, and if you like to go jeeping or overlanding or rock crawling or four-wheeling or trail riding or dirt track, whatever, there's lots of different sort of flavors of the same idea of using an internal combustion engine, or these days an electric four-wheel drive vehicle, to get out there and go ahead and see the world and run it over. Now you get to go buy the F-150 Lightning with absolutely stupefying amounts of torque at low RPMs. Electric motors have maximum torque at 0 RPM, which is why on, what's that show, Pinks, where people race for the titles to each other's, like, track racing cars. Pink Slips? Pinks? Yeah. Like the electric cars, like the one electric car that the guy built in his garage with 800 lithium batteries in the trunk, absolutely demolishes all the internal combustion engine vehicles, some of which are way overtuned in horsepower. Like, we have access to that technology now. And now in this planning phase is when the evil genius toils long into the night, to borrow the hero's journey trope, of being the person banging on an electric vehicle like a Honda Civic with 800 batteries in it, absolutely demolishing Mustangs and other ridiculous street racing cars. You get to learn the information at this phase. This is for those of you who like to information graze a lot, reading all the Wikipedia pages, downloading the apps, like for climbers it'd be something like Mountain Project, for hikers it'd be Trails Project. There's a lot of different ones. And picking up the skills with local climbing competitions. Learning how to play climbing games, for example, where you get together with a couple of buddies and each person in sequence adds one more hold on the climbing wall in the gym, all weather. And you can practice and hone those skills, and then you go out to Jackson Falls Natural Area and perfect those skills for outdoor sort of real world climbing instead of in the gym climbing. Okay. And you get to get super fancy equipment. All right. So, anybody, what is your particular poison? What is your favorite forest and outdoor recreation activity? What do you like to do? What do you find yourself doing a lot of? Or even more importantly, what do you find yourself wishing you were doing while your professors are kind of talking at you in boring lectures? Where do you wish you were right now? Doing what? Hawaii. Doing what?
Just sitting in those rock volcanoes.
Sitting in the volcanoes.
Not
All
the
right.
volcano, but the, you know what I mean? Like right by the volcano, lava flows, they leave it behind.
Yeah. All right. So later on this semester, we'll talk specifically about some research projects and recreation opportunities at Haleakala National Park in the lava tubes, in some of those volcanic spring-fed pools. Pretty cool stuff. Okay. So with that, what kind of information do we need to get to Hawaii successfully and safely and home afterwards, presumably? Yeah. Like, some of the information is real practical stuff, like how much are plane tickets? Which airline services Maui in the case of Haleakala, and so forth. And how do I get to Haleakala when I get there? Because it's a 10,000 foot mountain above sea level and a 20,000 foot mountain below sea level. It is higher than Everest overall, or taller than Everest overall, but not higher. What kind of skills do you need to go find a cool spot to chill in a volcano in Hawaii? Serious question. What skills do you need?
Seriously asking?
Yeah.
You need some good Navy friends to give you a ride over there first.
It's a long walk. Yeah.
So that's why you get a helicopter right buddy to give you a flyover.
There you go. Okay. You need things like skills to acquire a permit if you're going to go the legit route. You need skills like, how am I going to read this map? Oh, wait, it's upside down. And so forth. There's a lot of skill that goes into going into the soup of it and coming out in one piece. And of course, the equipment involved as well. As basic as, what kind of underwear are you going to be bringing along? Are you going to be hiking 80 miles up knife edge volcanic ridges up to some of these like lava pots and tubes in board shorts and suffering the so-called fat man's chafe? Or are you going to be wearing underwear that is wicking and durable and also very low dynamic coefficient of friction so that that chafe is not an issue, right? So it's information, understanding awareness of different kinds of underwear for backpacking and hiking and swimming and hanging out in a volcano. And everything out, skin out, and then everything in your pack, everything that you leave home out of your pack, because it's a good idea, but not the right idea for this trip, if that makes sense. Okay? So there's a ton that goes into this, a ton. And as a park ranger, you don't necessarily have access to somebody's kind of experience or history at this stage of things. Like if you're working as an FPO, Forest Protection Officer on the Shawnee, somebody shows up having done or having failed to do any of this. The planning, the skills, the equipment, the information, the social capital, the connections with Navy buddies who have helicopters. Like by the time the person is on site, or the group is on site, or the family is on site, they are already on the trajectory of creating a search and rescue problem for you, or having a really good, legal, safe, sustainable time.
Even the illegal ones are fun too, bro.
Say again?
Even the illegal ones are fun too.
I would never admit on recording to doing things outside the wire at national parks for the higher moral imperative of science. Ever. Would not. Speak with sarcasm or irony. Third phase is going to be the shortest phase. That's where you're in contact with them as the park ranger, okay? But 2 out of the 4 phases have already happened. This could be years of anticipation and planning and like 24 hours of on-site, okay? And granted, there are most likely, for most people, going to be a whole bunch of different on-site things, but each one we have to consider as its own thing. Like if this one goes badly, the others don't matter. They don't exist yet. Okay? So it is the activity, but it's also travel to, travel from. So we get at a lot of the busier national parks this sense of like even the transportation infrastructure, even the color of the bricks and stone that we use in building the visitor centers and where we place that visitor center. Like, is that visitor center even visible inside the park once you drive past the visitor center? Or do we site it so that it's visible from the access road and everybody knows to go there first, but once you're in the park, like nobody came for the visitor center, they came for the park, so let's hide that thing on the landscape. Does that make sense? Okay, so the travel to part is now considered a crucial or a critical part of kind of setting a good, sustainable, and also high-quality recreation trajectory for people's on-site portion of a trip. If anybody's ever been to the Blue Ridge Parkway, Skyline Drive, along the Shenandoah Ridgeline overlooking Washington, D.C., the travel on site is the experience. It's about a 70-mile long road with, 150 or so bends in the road, and each one of those bends goes around another local peak or prominence, and then you drive through a gap, and now you're looking east, and then you drive around that next peak, and now you're looking west, and all the trees are cleared downslope of each of those bends in the road, so you can see 100 miles on clear days, east or west. It's a really cool thing, and that whole experience is designed to feel sort of nice and low speed and flowy, and let's just pull off over for a picnic over here, and I see a bear over there. It's eating out of a dumpster. That's not great, but let's get some cell phone videos of it. That whole experience is designed and landscape architected to bring people through in a profoundly curated way into a place that is trying to feel as little curation as possible. It's a weird balance to strike. Done really well, people don't notice all the hard work that you've put in. Done poorly, it's all they can look at. Okay? So, there's this sense on the highway. This would have been 2012 or 2013. Driving to a research site at Grand Teton. That was the quality of my mobile phone a decade ago. So that's Grand Teton right there. And you come over this particular hill that we're on the highway. We're not even anywhere close. We're still about 80 miles from the park at this point, believe it or not. And this is the first glimpse you get of this range on a clear day. And so part of the experience of coming to Teton, that grand reveal, happens outside the park at 80 miles an hour on the highway, unless you've got some tour on, which is a not smart tourist, slowing down traffic for you on the state highway. Yeah, lollygagging, rubbernecking. We'll talk about what on-site traffic jams, specifically tied to wildlife species like bear jams, elk jams, caribou jams, how those go. Grand Teton is one place where on-site travel has a whole bunch of free-range bison just hanging out, laying down on the road, and if they lay down on the road, all of the traffic piles up because that's the one highway through that space. And you know what? You're just going to wait until that bison moves. And the army of 100 plus volunteer just traffic managers at Grand Teton alone, that's okay. That's the point, because in national parks, 50% of the mission is preservation. We're not managing those bison so that they're convenient. We're managing habitat for them, and we are the short-term passengers on their ride, and so forth. So, there's this travel to vibe, and it really is a vibe. And the policies that you set as the park ranger or the conservation police officer or the district ranger on any section of the Shawnee, for example, your policies affect the trip even before the trip gets to you. Because maybe these guys know that they have to wait in an hour-long line, like at Arches National Park each morning, just to get in the park. Maybe they are not looking forward to spending half an hour in line and paying a bunch of money and having to go on a very specific and rigidly selected backpacking itinerary down at the Grand Canyon, because there's a very limited set of spots where you can sustainably camp inside the Grand Canyon in the wilderness there. So you can upregulate or you can downregulate the vibe or the sense of things even before people get there by your choices as the manager. And inside the boundaries of the park, or the marine protected area in this case, we have this sense of there's still a lot of traveling to do. A lot of these parks and other protected areas that are used for recreation, they're huge. Many of them are millions of acres. And so there's a ton of travel inside the space that's still got to happen. So, are you going to make that, incentivize that to be high-speed, high-efficiency travel? Or are you going to make it low-speed, scenic travel, where you tie the ferry operator, the concessionaire that is running the ferry, up to, this would be up in Alaska, or up off the coast of Alaska in this case, but the 6-hour ferry ride across Lake Superior to Isle Royale from Houghton? Are you going to time that with sunrise and sunset each day? So that everybody, part of their experience, if they have to take this ferry boat to get there, at least they got a fairly good shot at a scenic sunrise or sunset along the way. Okay? You have some control over those things as the planning staff, as a ranger, whatever. And then understanding that people have arcs or trajectories that they go on while they're in the park or other protected area doing the activity, and things like energy level. Where are they going to resupply food if they're staying there a longer time? You're going to have like grocery stores and camp stores inside your park. At Grand Canyon, there are several, because there's might be 25,000 people there, and everybody needs groceries most days. The way that we like to do camping in America. So we want to be aware of that, because people's goals or expectations aren't necessarily to come in with a whole bunch of food laid up, jarred and canned or dehydrated or freeze-dried, depending on how paranoid survivalist you are. Most folks are like, yeah, we'll go and we'll kind of figure out food when we get there. So that means you got to have means for them to get food when they get there. Okay, so sometimes it's like there's a post office on side of the Grand Canyon Infirmary, there's a community center, there's a school. Several thousand people live and work at the Grand Canyon full time. So you gotta have housing for all of them, gas stations, stuff like that. It's a lot. It's a lot. And then finally, we get the longest phase, recollection, which is you've left now. You're gone, and you have the rest of your life to remember that and spread stories like, hey bro, did I ever tell you the time when I XYZ at the Grand Canyon, and so forth. So this phase, also completely out of your control. So what are folks saying about your trip? What are folks saying about your place? What expectations are your visitors creating for other visitors or for their next repeat trip back to? Well, they want to do something a little bit better or a little bit differently next time, having gone once. Okay? What mementos have you set people up to bring back to commemorate their trip? Physical objects back in the day, in the battle days, places like Dinosaur or Petrified Forest National Park, it's a national monument. There are historic side-by-side photos of this is how this place looked in 1925, and this is how it looked in 1980. And those are set up on site at Petrified Forest, for example, so you can look out from the same spot where those photos were taken 100 years ago, 40 or 50 years ago, and look at it now and see how much visibly less petrified forest there is in Petrified Forest, because people have been backing the minivan up for a long time, or the old station wagon before we had minivans, or before that the old Buick trunk, and just going home with mementos of their trip, huge chunks of petrified wood that are, in that particular instance, not considered a renewable resource by the federal government. In other environments, like places run by the Bureau of Land Management, like at Zion National Park or next to Zion National Park, federal crime to pull petrified wood out of Zion National Park. 100 yards across the fence line, it's the same rock formation, the same layer, and you can grab 25 pounds plus one chunk per person per day for the rest of your life if you really feel like it, off of the BLM parcel right next door. BLM considers it's not really a renewable resource, it's like a non-renewable resource there are billions of, so we just don't care that much. You do you, just don't exploit it, don't turn around and sell all these chunks, collect what you would like, and be responsible about it. Okay? So what are the mementos that are okay for you to kind of steer people towards or away from, or that you need to steer people away from? Briefly earlier in the semester we talked about how some folks have, since about 1970 or so, taken to getting like masonry saws, gas-powered masonry saws or rock saws, backpacking those into places that have things like petroglyphs, sawing those petroglyphs out of a cliff face and taking them home or selling them on the black market. That is a pretty unsustainable and horrible way to commemorate a trip. But that's how some people do. So part of park operations are going to be to figure out where this is happening, figure out where it's going to happen next, and interdicting those people. And those operations are lots and lots of fun. They're also very high pressure because we have zero room for error, zero room for slop, zero room for failure on people, on stopping people rock sawing petroglyphs out of the rock face. Okay? So, that's weird. We've got this time axis. So before the activity after the activity, and a sense of we got to engage with the people as well as being super awesome ecosystem managers in order for all of this stuff to hang together. Because recreation organizations, the recreation side of it has to be perfectly sustainable. If we are destroying the resources that we're going after, then it's not okay. We can't keep that up by definition. This is a real debate. So let's take a minute to have this debate about a very current issue that is happening right now on the Shawnee National Forest that some people are literally advocating to Congress right now should become Shawnee National Park. And I'm sure you guys are going to be talking about this in a bunch of other forestry classes because we are right in the thick of it. So, right now, Shawnee National Forest is run by the what agency? United States Forest Service, which is a service in the Department of what?
Interior.
Agriculture. All right. It is explicitly a conservation organism, utilitarian focus, greatest good for the most people for the longest time. And we need national forests because we really like having in the United States things like toilet paper. Really important to have wood, pulp, fiber, and non-timber forest products like clean watersheds, right? We gotta have drinking water too. The National Park System, National Park Service, is a service of the United States Department of Interior with a preservation mandate. They cannot do conservation operations, they have to do preservation operations, which means not the greatest utilitarian use for the most people until the heat death of the universe for the longest time sustainable. It is more of a, we gotta have these habitats, we gotta have them functional, and we gotta have them high quality to the highest standard, sort of humanly achievable. And at the same time, paradoxically, we have hundreds of millions of visitors across the same park system every single year, potentially trampling stuff, potentially trying to steal the petroglyphs, potentially trying to, or accidentally, hit the elk that we are trying to provide all this super high quality habitat for. It's a tricky balance. It is a fundamental contradiction in terms baked into the DNA of the Park Service in 1916 when it was created. And it gets even weirder when you start having folks advocating for a shift, a watershed change in the basic fundamental DNA of the plan for a place. So, Shawnee National Forest, conservation mandate. Like, on paper at least, there's been a lot of lawsuits about this lately in the past 20 years, but on paper, Shawnee National Forest is, among other things, a timber production area. Some folks don't really agree with that, and they want to see the habitat preserved instead, and so they're pushing for Shawnee National Park designation and taking management of this landscape and putting it in not just a different service, Forest Service to Park Service, but different department. This would be like, you guys all know Scott Air Force Base, right? Okay, Department of Defense. This would be like taking the land and facility management of Scott Air Force Base and moving it from Corps of Engineers, land and water management to something like IDNR management. Like major, not just different people wearing similar looking uniforms, but like different philosophy, different mandate, different laws draped around that particular landscape and what you can do there and what you can't. Big change. So, what do you guys and gals think about this? Thoughts? Questions? Comments? Verbal abuse? We bring this question up because just like with this time axis that moves from anticipation planning down through recollection or forward through recollection, we also have evolving availability of technology, which opens up completely new activities. And we also have people trying to evolve the conversation on how are we going to use, what's the best and highest use for what we now call the Shawnee National Forest, which wasn't a national forest until fairly recently. Yeah.
Well, I'm not from here, obviously, and from what I've gathered from the last 2 years of being down here, they haven't done a good job. They've actually done a shitty job of doing the forests. You know, not done burns, have not properly harvested the timber, have not properly managed the forest. Why don't they just combine the Forest Service with the Park Service and just have separate areas, but rotate those areas throughout the years? That way they can solve both problems at once.
That's a very bold move. Cows and sheep mixing on purpose? Man.
Well, you get some hybrids there, baby. You're gonna get some funky stuff.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, imagine the milk.
Probably be tasty.
Well, it would be something. It would. Yeah.
Well, that's, isn't that what you're getting at though? Is
I'm not getting at anything.
No,
I'm
but
asking.
like,
I'm very curious to
the
hear what you
Forest
guys got to
Service
think.
has not done a good job, from what I've understood. People, please correct me if I'm wrong. We're in one of these classes for this reason. They've done a shit job on the burns. Ruffner has said that. They've done a horrible job on the timber harvesting. Schoonover has said that. Zajac has said it. Multiple professors have said that they've done a terrible job managing Shawnee. But wouldn't the Park Service do the same shit but under a different umbrella? And if you combine both of them, they can rotate those sites, and then that way they're not only cleaning out the shit, they're actually preserving and conservating at the same time.
So that raises a really good point. And a couple of good questions. Fundamentally, conservation and preservation cannot be the same thing. You cannot preserve an area and log it. That is definitionally impossible. They are just different things. But it also raises the question of, well, can't we just combine these things? And maybe not.
I don't think you'd be able to like combine them, but I think it would be very interesting if, I mean, the Shawnee's like a big area, and so maybe like split it up. And it's like, it's not combining it, but one half is managed by Park Service, one half is Forest Service, and it'd be a good experiment to see what is truly successful.
Also a bold move. It's the South Park fractured but whole approach of if we can just carve it up even so. The Shawnee National Forest is one of the smallest national forests in the system. It's just smaller. It was created a lot later than some of the others. And a lot of land east of the Mississippi was, locked up in private use beforehand, and a bunch of the sort of collapsing hill farms of the Dust Bowl era got cobbled together into the Shawnee and then planted with non-native pine for soil stabilization purposes. And that was a Herculean effort at the time to assemble a bunch of small patchworky farms, and filling in some of the holes in the perimeter of the Shawnee is ongoing to this day. That's a big move to take one of the smallest forest and chop it up even smaller. Now, national parks do tend to be smaller than national forests around them because areas that we preserve tend to be much more unique, and the forest lands sort of arranged in a collar around most national parks tend to be and can be a lot larger because the Forest Service also manages stuff like grasslands. So it doesn't just have to look like a national park. It can be a whole bunch of different things and sort of most appropriately fall under the purview of the Forest Service. And the Park Service is like, no, man, it's got to be postcard worthy for us to do the thing. Now that's a huge oversimplification. It doesn't just have to be postcard worthy. But outstanding, rare, unique spots. Those are the words that we tend to use to justify creation of a national park. So yeah, we could chop it up and say the east half is national forest and the west half too pretty to die, so let's call it a national park. All right.
Part of the Scenic Riverways is ran by the Forest Service.
Exactly. So maybe there's a different way to go. That is, it stays a national forest, but it's also run by, in partnership, organizations like Nature Conservancy is one compromise. The Park Service also works with Nature Conservancy on some places, like at C&O Canal National Historic Park on the Potomac River on specific islands. The Park Service runs that. Basically, it's like a scenic riverways, but it's historic. And then specific islands within that, Nature Conservancy has a 50% management and kind of ownership stake in those spots. It's a weird thing, kind of nested ownership. Okay. All right, so now we're getting somewhere with it. What else could we do here? What else do we need to avoid here? This is the debate going on right now. What do you guys think? Yeah.
Do you think that it would be like, if it actually does switch over to a national park, do you think it would just be temporary to regenerate the land and then it would switch back to a forest after a few years or so, maybe longer?
That's an excellent question. So basically, roll in the pros to fix all this shit, and then hand it back and say, don't screw it up again.
Well, that's kind of like a bold move again, bro.
That's a spicy meatball, yeah. So usually national parks are created permanently, in perpetuity. You see a lot of like eternity leaning language when national park units are created. And the way that is intended to be completely unidirectional, like from national monument or national forest to park, is so that once something gets that preservation status, that's gotta be forever. Because if it's not forever, then anybody at any point can come in and say, you know what? I mean, Yosemite's nice and all, but what if we made a national recreation area? And like we put in some four-wheeling tracks in Yosemite Valley? That would be sick, bruh. And back in the day, the sense was, look, we don't know what kinds of new technology folks are gonna come up with or how society's gonna change. We need some things to be permanent. We need to just protect this house, so to speak. And yeah, we can change under the terms of conservation what we can do or how we can do a lot of land management on national forests, and grasslands, and national recreation areas, and recreation trail system and stuff like that. We can change all that. We can fine tune. We can kind of steer it in new directions as we need to. But some things, like Yosemite Valley, is this. You tend to hear language like it's a spiritual place. It's a transcendent place, as well as a river valley, as well as a place to go camping, and so on and so forth. It's like a natural cathedral, folks like John Muir would say a century ago. So, like bringing something into National Park Service management and then back out, I'm not aware of a lot of examples of that. But it's a cool idea, and it's not necessarily a wrong one, right? Like this is all under debate. Under the previous presidential administration, a couple of national monuments were under debate for basically getting delisted as national monuments so that mining operations could go in. Basically taking stuff out of Forest Service management or Park Service management and putting it in like Bureau of Mines management, so we could extract mineral wealth out of those places. And yeah, we'll keep the surface trail systems in place. You can go hiking and play with your tents and stuff like that. Go play hide and go fuck yourself, But the national conversation for places like Bears Ears National Monument and so forth, there's some spots kind of right north of the Grand Canyon. The sense was, no, we put these in national monument status as kind of a waiting status to maybe become national parks or formally national forests. And you can do some mining in some places on some national forests. Like, we don't want to go the other direction of setting aside a place and then peeling off all that hard work and all that protection to set it up as a place where we can just go mining and stuff like that. But it gets even more tricky. Like, Arches National Park is right on top of a huge uranium deposit. What if we need to build a whole bunch more bombs for national security purposes? But it's a national park, but we need bombs. But it's a national park, but we need bombs, right? So the trick here is avoiding the problems of so-called dead hand control, where people in 1916 made decisions about national park designation being a permanent one-way trip relative to the needs of things like atomic energy and atomic weapons getting invented, decades later and so forth, and all of that. It all gets weird. Any other thoughts? We got a couple minutes left. Yeah.
Didn't they have this debate about Gettysburg too? Because wasn't Gettysburg National Monument under bulk like this for a while, before the Park Service finally took it over? Or was it always a National Park Service from when it actually, because it's considered those two things. It was a forest and then a park, wasn't it?
Right. So a lot of these places, a lot of things that aren't, Gettysburg isn't really a recreational place. It's more like hallowed ground, hallowed by a lot of our great grandparents and stuff like that, or great grandparents these days. So the sense there is, what about places that are not clearly like, Gettysburg isn't a national park, it's a national military site, national battlefield, national historic site, stuff like that. And the Park Service runs pretty much all of the major national military parks, national historic sites, stuff like that, national battlefields. And those are really ultimately one-way progressions that end at the National Park Service, for sure. Yeah.
I thought it was kind of like the same situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, how did they figure out how to work together, and we use that tactic in this scenario?
Exactly. So, Land Between the Lakes, we'll end with this one. Land Between the Lakes was a bunch of people living in like small southern Kentucky, northern Tennessee, like hill farm, karst environment kind of situation. A lot of folks descended from like the original Caucasian, Western European settlers that arrived and pushed everybody else out and started farming and stuff. And then for national security purposes and national industry purposes, Army Corps of Engineers comes in and dams up both rivers on both sides, turning it from land between the rivers to land between the lakes. They manage that, they get that all set up, kick everybody off the land, and then they hand it over to the United States Forest Service and say, look, you may or may not have wanted this, but here's land between the lakes. You guys need to manage this now. We're not really in the business of forestry. We manage lots and lots of water and forests and stuff like that, but that's not our primary mission. We're gonna take care of these lakes and facilitate industry travel and barges and stuff on them. You guys take care of the dryland stuff. And so the Forest Service did that. And maybe 58 years from now, maybe the Forest Service exits management and passes it over to the Park Service. But it is very rare for things to go the other way. So that has real consequences for this discussion about the Shawnee. Not that it can't go back the other way from Park Service to Forest Service, but we don't have a lot of mechanisms for that. And if we do go that route, that sure opens a whole can of worms for other places getting delisted as national parks. and turned into national monuments, and then maybe turned into mines. Makes sense? It's a little slippery slope or dead hand control idea. All right, cool. That's it for today. Let's pack it up. See you next week. And haven't seen the weather report yet. Has anybody got a chance to maybe head out to